When I was a kid, my parents were really good about taking us to service events, and so a place where you could um, go and work alongside people and help them out, help them with a project they were doing, or help another church out to get something kind of started to get it off the ground. And there's something about just doing hands-on work and putting your faith into action that is difficult to teach with a book. So I really value that my parents did that for me, and I do hope to pass that along to my kids as well.
I was in an extracurricular, so a dance studio that was Christian, like the founders were Christian, it was Christian based. So I really think that helped my faith by having something separate from my parents, separate from church too, that I was really my own, and it gave me a lot of really great friendships and mentors from that experience that helped me really um, kind of develop my own foundation, I guess, in my faith and like my own, just my own faith, really. And so ideally, if I could have my kids in some sort of extracurricular, I mean, I know there's Upward, there's other, like Upward has cheerleading too. There's a lot of different things, just different resources that I think would be beneficial for my kids to have their own separate activity that helps grow their faith.
Two things come to mind. One, every celebration or holiday was an event to tie back to Jesus, and I plan to do that for my children as well. For example, like the Jesse tree for Christmas, or I even remember for Easter, instead of getting the Easter bunny baskets, we got baskets filled with candy that had crosses in it, and things like that. There were little and subtle changes, but ways to just continue to reiterate that Jesus was the reason for a lot of the celebrations and holidays that we had. Another thing that my parents did that I thought was really good, and something that I want to instill in my children, would be that serving, whether that was through going on a mission trip, or even remember summers we would help out with. I think it was Kids Eat Free for the summers, and just ways to get out of my own bubble, and just to remember that there are people in different life situations, and the world doesn't revolve around me. And I think that was a big thing for me, just to continue to remember.
So I'm currently pregnant. So I already have one kid. Her name is Dylan, and we have life verses for all of our children. So we're currently thinking about what life verse we want for our soon to be baby boy. But my parents did life verses for us. So mine was Joshua 1:9, which still is because it's my life verse. And then my brother Zach also has a life verse as well. And those life verses have just really helped us understand how important it is to memorize scripture, and also has just helped us to really be able to calm down when there are things that don't go our way specifically, and we can sit back, remember, okay, this is my life verse, this is who God is. Like my verse talks about how he is always with me and to not fear or to be dismayed. And so because of those things, I get to sit back, think about that. Okay, this is who God is, this is who he says I am, and then I can relax and just kind of confidently walk through life knowing, oh, right, that's who the Lord is. And so because they did that for us, my husband and I think it's really important that we do something very similar for our children. So we do that. And my mother also, as we got older, anytime we left the house by ourselves, got to drive around and just do fun high school things with our friends, my mom would always, just as a reminder, just say, hey, don't forget whose you are. Don't forget whose you are. Um, just as a reminder of like, I do belong to Shirley Crouch. I do belong to Jim Crouch, but the person that I really belong to is the Lord. And how am I going to walk through my day today knowing that I am a creation of God?
And I think that my parents did is that they just showed me how to serve and how to be involved in the church. My parents, when I was around 3 years old, helped start a church. And so from day one of that, of having to just help set up tables and chairs and help greet people throughout the years. And I know that through the years that my daughter Megan was up here at the church when I was up here at the church, and she helped out with several different activities. And then just seeing how you just be involved with the church in the only way that they are asked you to do that.
When I was a kid, and even I mean even now, my parents, when things get tough, they pray, and they're also very good about um, reminding us and remembering when prayers came true. And it's a little practical thing that helps us to remember the goodness of God and remember that this faith is something that is real, and it is tangible, and something that I again hope to pass along to my kids as well.
I think my parents lived in a way that showed that what they had wasn't theirs, whether it was their time or their money, or just what they did day in and day out, whether that was reading the Bible or praying, and just seeing them live those things in spite of me, but also for me and to show me an example, I think really spurred on my faith, but also showed me that they believed in a God that was true and that was real and that wanted to have a relationship with me.
My parents really took an interest in making sure that we went around and we visited people in the neighborhood. We visited people that came to church that might have been sick. My parents helped lead a kind of a senior adult worship time at a nursing home when I was young. And so my mom would play piano and my dad would preach. And sometimes I'd get up there and tell a Bible story. Sometimes it was correct. Sometimes I was a little off on my names. But it was there being able to show that having what I learned in Sunday school, what I learned through church, and then be able to apply that and then be able to use that knowing that having faith that what I was seeing and putting into use would be proactive and be helpful to whoever I come in contact with.
Honestly, just their daily lives and how open they were talking about it. If we had a big family problem or had any, they would be very open about, okay, we're going to be praying for this, and they would be praying for it, and just kind of how they lived their lives to show that they really took it seriously by just being open about their faith and really living it out each day.
I grew up having a missionary aunt and uncle who were overseas, and we got to have a ton of conversations about why they left and got to hear stories about God's faithfulness with them and how they were doing in the mission field. And that was one aspect of how my parents really just reminded me, okay, the Lord is not just faithful in Texas, He's faithful all the way across the world in Southeast Asia. And then also, my parents were really good about just stopping and showing me, hey, do you see this thing that just happened? The Lord is good because this happened. Or, yeah. And then, there were just a lot of moments in my life growing up that my parents would take the time to really talk to us about, hey, do you remember when you prayed about this thing? Look how God answered this prayer. And my dad was really good about recording those things. And so he actually had a little journal, and I think he still does, of just prayer requests that he writes and that he keeps and that he prays for and prays over. And then he does that daily, and then he would scratch them out when they were answered. And so you could even just see the faithfulness and who God was just through this little book of prayers that my dad had for people who were sick, for work things that were going on for my life, for my brother's life, for my mom's life, just for family. So it was really cool to see God's faithfulness through the years. It's just this really small little notebook, which I'm sure he has a ton of those. But it's cool to see that, because then as you get older, you, as a Christian, want to know more about other Christians and their faith, and getting to hear about people like Amy Carmichael, who also kept a journal of prayers and recorded things of how God is faithful, and to see that like your parents are not the only people doing those things is also really encouraging.
Well, I wasn't really given the option. I always joke that I started attending church 9 months before I was born. Like I said, they helped start a church when I was about 3 years old. I stayed at that church till I was about 22, and so I grew up in that church. And so we were there, Sunday morning, Sunday night. We were there Wednesday. If there was some kind of potluck, we were there. Whatever choir performance, we had RAs. Then same thing there. And so when we came to Lakeland, we looked for a church that had not only activities for us, but activities for our children. And so Megan was involved in Awanas at that time, and I grew up through the Awana program.
So church for us was just a rhythm of life. So we went to church every Sunday unless you were sick, and it was just it wasn't a demand, it wasn't even a request, it was just something that we did. And even as we got older, my brother played baseball, and so there were a lot of conversations of, hey, if you were to play select baseball, then we would have to take time away from church. And so that's just not the journey that we want to take, because our community and being pushed towards Christ is more important than playing a sport every Sunday.
I always joke that anytime the doors were open, we were there. So whether that was Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, Sunday afternoons, we were there on Wednesday. So we were there all of the time.
So this kind of changed. Like when we were younger, we only went on Sundays, and then I remember a shift, I think around 5th grade, when my parents became more involved in church and my dad became a deacon. We were suddenly there all the time. So pretty much we were there Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesdays, all the time, which was a little uncomfortable at first, going from just once a week to all the time the doors were open, it seemed like. And we were really expected to be there pretty much every time the doors were open, and it helped create friendships. There's really no other way to get to know the other people in the youth group or in the church, and really become like that church family without actually being present and being there.
My parents are regular attenders, at least in my experience. You never know what they get up to these days, right? But when we were kids, it was every week. It was on Sunday mornings. If the church had a Sunday night service, we'd be there. If it had a Wednesday service, we'd be there. It wasn't, I never felt forced to go. It was expected, of course, because that's, that was just kind of part of the culture they set up for our family. But it got to the point where, we wanted to go, or at least I wanted to go. And so I never felt like, that I was pressured into going. But yeah, it was expected weekly. They were also really good about recognizing that there are times when church attendance is not the highest value, and that there are other things that can come in front of that. And I think they were really good about being gracious and understanding for when certain things would come up, or, not being legalistic about it, but just saying, kind of putting the expectation out there that, hey, this is something that we do because it's good for you, and then being understanding when that's not always the case.
Well, my mom played piano, and so a lot of times she would play piano, we would sing songs. She would be practicing for the Sunday come in, and so we'd be praying, practicing those. Like I said, they led a service on Sunday night sometimes at a retirement home, and so my dad would be preaching, and so there would be times where he would be practicing the preaching to my sister and I, and so then he would sit there and kind of ask us about it, if there was anything that he needed to improve on or stuff that didn't make sense, to try to not necessarily dumb it down to make it easier to where somebody could understand. And so it was through those teachings that both my sister and I were saved, through his practicing of preaching, and that he both led us different times to the Lord. And
What did family worship look like for you at home? My family, especially my mom, a lot of times would have worship music playing or something like that. I think we get this funny idea in our head that in order to be like a worshipful family or a good Christian family, we need to have some sort of like, dad preaching a sermon, or the family singing songs around the dinner table or something like that. And hey, if that's for you, that's fine. I'm not against that. I do think there's kind of this false idea that worship is singing and worship is prayer sessions. When we look to the Bible, worship is so much more. Worship is how we live our lives, right? It's how we live our lives in a way that glorifies God. And so I think in that sense, my parents were able to make our home a worshipful home by instilling a culture that welcomed spiritual exploration, in the sense that they wanted us to come and know God as he is. And so they welcomed questions about God. I think that's so important for kids as they grow up, especially today, to know that they have a safe place to ask their questions. My parents are great about that. I still feel the openness to ask those kind of questions at home. I think my parents were able to develop a kind of culture of worship where, sure, if we broke out a song, that's fine. But it's so much more about, how do you set up a house that promotes righteousness, that promotes these, living for God and doing the things God has asked. And my parents did that.
so
For our family, it didn't always look like her traditional Bible study, family worship time, like a set in stone every single day. It was more of the conversations we had, or when we went on vacation, my parents were very intentional to say, okay, look at this beautiful creation, look around, like this is something that God has made. And so those are just really, I think, just different daily worship things that were kind of integrated into our family activities that didn't even really seem like formal worship. And then two, like my parents didn't super monitor everything we listened to, but my mom especially is very like, everything that you put into your mind and your heart really affects you. So we were always encouraged to listen to godly music, or just try to stay away from some of the more worldly books, movies, everything that's out there.
Honestly, I don't remember what it looked like at home, but what I do remember is that any time that we got in and out of my mom's car, she always had the Christian radio station playing. And funny enough, as much as I gave my mom a hard time about it, or tried to change the channel, or even wanted to ride in Dad's cars because sometimes he played country music, I listened to the Christian radio station in my car day in and day out. And so that's even something that I plan to do for my kids, is to encourage worship in the car.
So I would say that there were a lot of times that my mom would try to do Bible studies with me, and there were a lot of different inconsistent things that we would do off and on. But one of the biggest things that my parents really did was just showing us how to be Christians and how to be believers and walk by faith. And a lot of that looked like just seeing that my mom sat there and was doing her Bible study every single day, getting ready to go to Bible study class, or doing other stuff for Sunday school, getting ready to do Sunday school class, because her and my dad did the fourth grade Sunday school class forever. And so just seeing them prepare for those things and just seeing how their faithfulness to those things showed who God was really cool. And then the same thing with my dad writing through his prayer book and seeing that was really awesome. Yeah, and I would just say a lot of it was little moments and little times that we just got to talk to each other about who Christ was in our day-to-day rhythms, or seeing something that happened to me and having conversations about, okay, well, what does this mean about God? What does this mean about you? And then how can we work through these things? So always just being pointed towards Christ, even through like silly situations like girls being mean to me, or my brother not making a team, or me not making the top choir at school. And just being able to have conversations of, okay, so what does that look like now? The situation look like now that we can step back and say, okay, you are a Christ follower. You do walk with the Lord and he loves you. So now how do we go about those things?